Ever find yourself, resetting a password again and thinking there has to be a better way? Or maybe just looked at your phone unlocking with your face and wondered, well, what's the bigger story here?
Uh-huh.
Welcome to the deep dive. We pull apart the key details from lots of different sources. Today, we're really zeroing in on how biometrics, fingerprints, faces, all that, and these passwordless systems have changed.
Yeah, we've basically gone through a ton of online commentary, expert takes, articles spanning from August 2019 right up to now May 2025.
Exactly. And our mission, if you like, is to figure out, okay, how far have we actually come in ditching passwords? What were the big steps, the key tech, and crucially, are those old questions about privacy and security still hanging around?
Right. It's about understanding the real shifts, not just listing features. The convenience versus security balance is, well, it's always the core issue, isn't it?
It is. And this whole deep dive really kicked off from something we saw from back in August 2019. Just a simple question, but it makes you think.
You can change a password if it gets stolen, right? But can you change your biometrics?
Exactly. That kind of hits the nail on the head for the whole dilemma. It really frames the journey perfectly.
So let's do that. Let's wind back the clock. August 2019. What did things look like then?
Okay, so back in 2019, biometrics were, well, they were already pretty common in our daily tech lives. Fingerprint scanning, facial recognition, they were definitely the main ones.
Yeah.
Especially on smartphones.
Yeah, Face ID on iPhones, and pretty much every Android phone had a fingerprint sensor somewhere. That was like the standard way to unlock your phone.
Totally. And the numbers back that up. Something like, 68% of smartphones had biometrics turned on, and maybe 70% of Americans were using fingerprint scanning regularly.
Felt pretty futuristic then, didn't it? Sleek. But it was mainly just faces and fingerprints, right? Other stuff like iris scanning or voice recognition wasn't really mainstream. Not so much, no. They were around, but definitely more niche. What's interesting, though, is even with all this fingerprint and face scanning becoming normal, people were asking some pretty fundamental questions.
Like what?
Well, privacy was a big one. Where's my fingerprint data actually going? How safe is it? And then that core issue we just mentioned, the immutability problem.
Mm-hmm.
If your fingerprint data gets leaked in a data breach, well, you can't exactly get a new fingerprint, can you?
Right. You're stuck with it.
Yeah.
And wasn't regulation playing a part too? GDPR was fairly new then, wasn't it?
Absolutely. GDPR in Europe had really come into force, and that put a huge emphasis on how companies handled biometric data. You needed clear consent, you needed strong data protection. It definitely made companies think harder.
Okay. And what about getting rid of passwords altogether? Was that even a thing back then?
It was starting. The idea of going passwordless was gaining traction, but the early solutions, they mostly relied on those same biometrics, fingerprints, faces, or maybe things like physical security keys, those little USB things.
Uh-huh. Or the codes texted to your phone.
Exactly. One-time passcodes. And the FIDO2 standards, which are designed to stop phishing, they were starting to get some attention, but it was early days.
So passwords were still basically running this show.
Oh, completely. They were the default. Everyone knew them, even if everyone hated them. That original tweet we found, "Can we change? #biometrics?" It just perfectly captured that tension, the promise of this cool new tech versus these real worries about security, privacy, your unchangeable data, all happening while rules like GDPR were coming in.
Yeah, it sums it up well. And who are the big players in this space in 2019?
Well, on the consumer side, you had Apple and Samsung really pushing biometrics in their phones. Then companies like HID Global were big in providing biometric tech for businesses, security systems, that sort of thing.
And the passwordless side.
Still pretty nascent, but you had companies like Auth and Okta, the identity management folks, starting to really explore what that future might look like, dipping their toes in.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing, presumably. Were there problems with the tech itself?
Oh, for sure. There were definitely hurdles, things like false positives, the system thinking you're someone else. And a really big one was demographic bias, especially with early facial recognition.
Oh, so?
Some systems just weren't as accurate for people with darker skin tones, for example, higher error rates. That was a serious issue. Plus, you had the risk of spoofing people trying to trick the system with photos or masks.
Right. So trust was a big factor. How did the general public feel about it all?
Pretty skeptical, actually. There were surveys showing 80% of Americans were concerned about their biometric data being misused, especially by the government, surveillance worries.
And speaking of government and big organizations, weren't there some specific examples from late 2019 that highlighted these concerns?
Yeah.
Something about a bank in Russia.
Yeah, Sberbank. They announced plans for this huge centralized biometric database for financial transactions, which, immediately raises flags. Well, putting all that incredibly sensitive data in one place, that makes it a massive target for hackers. A breach there would be catastrophic, and it also brings up privacy concerns on a grand scale.
Okay. And wasn't there something about the FBI, too?
Right. News came out that Gemalto, a security company, was supplying biometric tech to the FBI, which again, on one hand, shows how valuable the tech was becoming for law enforcement, but on the other hand, it just poured fuel on those public fears about surveillance.
Okay, so August 2019. Lots of promise, tech getting common, but real worries about security, privacy, bias, and what big institutions might do with the data. Got it.
That's a pretty good summary, yeah.
So let's fast forward nearly 6 years later, May 2025. Feels like a different world tech-wise. What's the state of biometrics now?
It's changed incredibly fast, honestly, a rapid transformation. Biometrics in 2025 are basically ubiquitous everywhere, and that's been hugely driven by advances in AI, machine learning, and this move towards using multiple types of biometrics together.
Okay, ubiquitous, and the market reflects that.
Massively, we're talking big numbers. The market value jumped from maybe $43 billion in 2022 to probably around $68–69 billion this year. And it's projected to go over $80 billion by 2027. That's like 20% growth every year. Huge.
Wow. Okay. And you mentioned using multiple types together, multimodal. Is that the term? How does that help?
Exactly, multimodal. So instead of just your fingerprint or just your face, the system uses a combination, maybe face and iris scan, or fingerprint and voice.
Why do that?
Two main reasons: accuracy and security. It's much harder for the system to make a mistake, like letting the wrong person in if it needs to match two different things. And it's way, way harder for someone to fake two different biometric traits at the same time. Plus, it can actually make it smoother for the user, sometimes more options to authenticate.
Like having two different keys for the same lock? Makes sense. And AI and machine learning, how have they changed the game?
They've been absolutely fundamental. AI allows these systems to actually learn and adapt. Like if you get a small cut on your finger, the system can learn to still recognize your print. Or it adapts to subtle changes in your face over time.
Okay, that's clever.
And maybe even more importantly, AI has revolutionized liveness detection.
Liveness detection.
Meaning making sure it's a real live person presenting the biometric, not just a photo or a mask or even like a deepfake video now. The AI can analyze tiny little things, micro expressions, skin texture, blood flow, sometimes things that are almost impossible to fake convincingly. This has massively cut down on spoofing attacks.
That sounds like a huge step up in security. But what about that bias issue we talked about from 2019? Has AI helped fix the problems with facial recognition being less accurate for some groups?
That's still a work in progress, honestly. It's a really critical point. AI has helped improve overall accuracy, yes, and there's been a lot of effort to make the training data more diverse. But disparities can still exist.
So it's not completely solved.
Not completely. Some studies still show higher error rates for facial recognition on people with darker skin tones, sometimes significantly higher. It really highlights that we need constant vigilance, careful algorithm design, and really diverse data sets to make sure these systems are fair for everyone. It's not just a tech problem, it's an ethical one.
A really important reminder. Okay, shifting slightly, we've all become much more aware of, well, hygiene in the last few years. Has that pushed certain types of biometrics forward?
Definitely. The pandemic massively accelerated the move towards contactless biometrics. Things like facial recognition, iris scanning, voice recognition, anything where you don't have to touch a shared sensor saw a huge surge in adoption.
Makes sense. Any new contactless tech emerging?
Yeah, we're seeing some really interesting developments. Things like ultrasound fingerprint scanning. You don't need to physically touch the surface in the same way. And even systems that can identify you by your unique cardiac rhythm, believe it or not.
Wow, heart rhythm. That sounds like something out of science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
But with all this advanced tech, what about the privacy side? Is data being handled differently now?
There's certainly more focus on privacy-preserving techniques. A big trend is edge computing.
Meaning the processing happens.
Right on your own device. So your phone, your laptop, your raw biometric data, your fingerprint image, your face scan doesn't necessarily get sent off to some central server. It's processed locally.
So it stays with you.
Exactly. That reduces the delay, the latency, but crucially, it enhances privacy because your most sensitive data isn't flying across the internet or sitting in a big database somewhere quite as often.
That sounds like a positive move for user control.
And where are we seeing all this advanced biometric tech being used now, beyond just unlocking phones?
Oh, it's really broadened out. Healthcare is a big one, patient check-in, verifying identities securely, entertainment thing, ticketless entry to concerts or theme parks.
Banking is huge, obviously, for know your customer, KYC checks, verifying who you are when you open an account, and definitely for authorizing payments and transactions. And even in the public sector, biometric voter registration is now used in, like, 80% of African countries, for example.
It really has spread far and wide, hasn't it? Okay, let's switch gears slightly to the other side of this coin. Passwordless authentication. Where are we with a push to get rid of passwords in 2025?
Passwordless has properly exploded. I mean, the market growth projections are staggering. It was maybe around $18 billion this year, expected to hit something like $86 billion by 2033.
Oh.
Yeah, nearly 19% growth per year. It just shows there's this huge realization that passwords are, frankly, a security nightmare and just annoying for users.
So what's driving that massive shift? What's making passwordless actually happen now?
A huge factor is the mainstream adoption of FIDO2 standards and specifically passkeys.
Passkeys.
Yeah.
We hear that term a lot now.
Right. And major companies like Microsoft, Google, Apple, they've really jumped on board. Passkeys basically use clever cryptography instead of a password you have to remember. Think of it like having a unique digital key stored securely on your device. It's way harder to phish or steal than a password.
How does that work exactly, in simple terms?
Well, there's a private key on your device and a public key shared with the website. When you log in, your device proves it has the private key without ever revealing it. Your face scan or fingerprint often unlocks access to that private key. It's much more secure.
And Microsoft is pushing this hard.
Yeah, big time. They actually announced that new consumer accounts created this year, 2025, will be passwordless by default. You'll use biometrics or a device PIN instead. That's a massive signal to the industry.
That does feel like a tipping point. And it sounds like biometrics are absolutely essential to making passkeys work for most people.
Totally. Biometrics are the user-friendly way to unlock those passkeys. Look at payments. Facial biometrics for payments went from maybe 670 million users in 2020 to a projected 1.4 billion this year. People are getting really comfortable using their face or fingerprint to pay for things, password-free.
And presumably it's just easier, less hassle than remembering password 123, but with more symbols.
That's the other huge win. Yeah, the user experience. No more creating crazy complex passwords you instantly forget. No more password managers necessarily. You see things like tap-and-go logins using your face. Companies like Trusona offer this. It's just much quicker, much smoother.
Better security, easier to use, sounds great, but are we just trading password problems for privacy problems if everything relies on my face or fingerprint?
That's still the million-dollar question, isn't it? Privacy concerns haven't vanished. Even with tech like edge computing, there's still skepticism. A lot of experts, maybe over half, doubt that regulations can actually keep up with how fast this tech is moving.
So laws like GDPR or CCPA in California, they're helping, but maybe not enough.
They've definitely set a higher bar for data protection, absolutely. But you still hear about issues with data being collected without proper consent, or worries about surveillance potential. The rules are there, but enforcement and interpretation in this rapidly changing landscape are, well, challenging.
So the privacy debate is far from over.
Far from it. There's a lot of work happening on developing ethical guidelines, global standards, trying to tackle bias, consent, data security. But getting everyone to agree and actually implement them effectively, that's an ongoing process.
You mentioned tracking this through online posts and discussions. Did anything from the last few years, say 2020 to 2023, give clues about how this conversation was evolving?
Oh, yeah. Those later posts really show the threads continuing. Like November 2020, still lots of chatter linking biometrics directly to surveillance fears. Then February 2021, mentions of the EU revising its IDAS regulation.
IDAS, that's the digital identity one, right?
Exactly. Setting up a framework for digital IDs across Europe. And yeah, biometrics are almost always part of that discussion for secure verification.
So regulators were definitely trying to keep up.
Trying, yes. But the debate was fierce. Remember June 2021? There was a lot of noise around the EU potentially banning facial recognition in public spaces. That just shows the massive split between using the tech for security versus the fear of mass surveillance.
A real tug of war.
Totally. Then October 2022, talk about the EU digital identity wallet again, very likely using biometrics. And even late 2023 December, guidelines coming out specifically about data protection when scraping data to train AI models.
Relevant because AI is so key to modern biometrics.
Precisely. The quality and ethical sourcing of data used to train these biometric AI systems is a huge privacy issue in itself. So yeah, those posts show this constant back and forth. Tech advances, security needs, privacy alarms, regulatory responses. It's a cycle.
Can we maybe tie some of those big improvements we discussed earlier to these ongoing discussions? Give us some concrete examples.
Sure. Let's take multimodal biometrics. We mentioned Barclays Bank using fingerprint and face scans for banking. That fits the trend, boosts security. It also has to align with GDPR consent rules. Now, think back to that 2019 Sberbank plan for a centralized database.
Right, the big honeypot worry.
Exactly. Barclays' approach, often keeping more processing local or using different methods, is arguably a more privacy-conscious way to achieve similar security goals in finance compared to that massive central database idea. Shows different paths being taken.
Okay, good example. What about liveness detection?
Right, AI-powered liveness. Think of Transmit Security's selfie tech that checks if you're real. That directly tackles the spoofing fears people had back in 2019 and the kind of privacy security risks mentioned in those 2020 posts. If you can trust the system isn't easily fooled by a photo, it builds confidence.
So tech evolving to fix its own earlier weaknesses. What about passwordless itself?
Well, the big push by Google, Apple, Microsoft with passkeys and FIDO2. That connects directly to those EU digital identity plans from 2021-2022. Governments and tech giants are moving in parallel towards more secure, potentially biometric-linked digital IDs and logins. And the fact that passwordless systems have grown, 50% in popularity since 2019, users are clearly voting with their feet, or rather, their faces and fingers.
Yeah. Okay, and contactless.
Airports are the classic example now. Facial recognition, speeding up check-in and boarding. We mentioned maybe 75% passenger preference in some 2023 surveys. People like the convenience. But then you contrast that acceptance with the EU's proposed ban on facial recognition in public spaces.
So context is everything. We accept it for convenience at the airport, but worry about it watching us on the street.
Exactly. The use case dramatically changes how people feel about it. And finally, maybe behavioral biometrics.
Like how you type or move a mouse.
Yeah. MasterCard using that for payment security. That links back to the 2023 AI data scraping concerns. How is that behavioral data collected? How is it used? What are the privacy implications of analyzing those subtle patterns? It's effective for security. Apparently, e-commerce biometric use is up 5-fold, but it opens up new questions.
It really is fascinating how tangled it all is. Tech, rules, feelings, money. So let's try and wrap this up. Looking back over this whole journey, 2019 to 2025, what's the headline?
I think the biggest takeaway is how biometrics have gone from being this sort of exciting but slightly scary technology to something much more mature, integrated, and frankly essential, especially for driving the passwordless future. The tech got better, multimodal, AI liveness making it more secure.
But those core challenges from 2019, privacy, bias, needing clear rules, they haven't just vanished, have they?
Nope. Still very much with us. Which brings us right back to that first question. Can we change #biometrics? And the answer is still no. We can't change our actual fingerprints or faces. But what has changed, and is still changing, are the ways we protect the data, the rules around using it, and the ethical thinking about how we deploy this unique personal information.
So we can't change the core data, but we're getting smarter, hopefully, about how we handle its digital twin.
That's the idea, or at least that's the ongoing effort, which kind of leaves a final thought, maybe for you listening. In this world that's leaning more and more on our unchangeable biology for security, what's our collective responsibility? Individuals, companies, governments, how do we make sure this is done right, ethically, securely?
And what's next? What are the innovations or maybe the pitfalls just around the corner that we haven't even thought of yet?
Exactly. It's a conversation that is definitely not over.